What we are covering here is Ind AS 113, which talks about fair value measurement from we'll try to look it from a values perspective. So now, before we dig deep into Ind AS 113, let's try to understand what 113 covers and what 113 does not cover. So now, as you would all know, that various accounting standards, Ind AS, require valuations to be done on a fair value basis. They either stipulate or permit fair value measurements. Some of the accounting standards require not just measurement but also disclosures. So wherever any accounting standard requires or permits the use of fair value or disclosure of fair value, such fair value measurement and or disclosure has to be made in accordance with Ind AS 113. So basically, Ind AS 113 does not by itself stipulate where the fair value measurement has to be done, but what it does tell is wherever the fair valuation has to be done, how it has to be done. So it basically it's supplementary to the other Ind AS. It by itself does not prescribe any fair value measurements. So examples of various accounting standards which require or which permit fair valuation are Ind AS 16 property, plant and equipment, Ind AS 38 intangible assets, 40 investment property, 105 asset held for sale, 109 fair financial instruments. So these are the accounting standards which basically require the valuation measurements and or disclosure. So wherever it prescribes, Ind AS 113 kicks in to provide the framework as to what has to be done. Now there are certain exclusions as well, although a particular accounting standard Ind AS permits or requires disclosure of fair value, but still Ind AS 113 is not applicable. Such instances are in the case of Ind AS 102 share-based payments, which although requires fair value measurement, Ind AS 113 is not required to be followed. Again, Ind AS 116 leases, where fair value measurement is required, but such fair value measurement need not be done in accordance with, need not be done to follow the scriptures of Ind AS 113. There are other Ind ASs which require not fair value measurements, but which measurements which are similar to fair value, such as Ind AS 2 relating to valuation of inventories, where net realizable value has to be computed. In the case of Ind AS 36, impairment of assets, where value in use has to be computed. Now, again, valuation, there are certain Ind ASs which require valuation, fair value measurement, so and also fair value disclosure. For example, in the case of Ind AS 19, employee benefits, although it requires fair value measurement, in which case fair value measurement would be done by following Ind AS 113. But as far as disclosure is concerned, the disclosure requirements of 113 are dispensed of in the case of Ind AS 19. And again, in the case of impairment of assets, where fair value less cost of disposal are computed, the measurement would be done in the case of Ind AS 113, but disclosure requirements of Ind AS 113 has been dispensed off with. Now, why are we required to understand the scope and exclusions? Now, this is a debatable topic which we have been debating for a long time. With regards to the with regards to as to who should be valuing, who should be the right person to do the valuation, whereby the Ind AS requires the valuation. In such cases, according to me, wherever an Ind AS requires a valuation to be done, a fair valuation to be done, such evaluation needs to be done by a registered valuer, because Ind AS is prescribed by the virtue of the rules which has been made under the Act, and what rules require. All the rules have to follow the act, and the act requires registered valuer's valuation. Therefore, valuation has to be done by a registered valuer, is my humble opinion. Now, when I put across this particular opinion, then what I normally the question which basically, or the counter argument, is that almost everything is a valuation, which means everything has to be valued by a registered valuer, is one of the counter arguments. So basically, this is where the scope exclusions come to the probably might give an answer. So this is a debatable point. If anyone wants to basically provide their comments, then we can have a 3-minute discussion on this as well. Okay, fair enough. So let's skip this topic and let's basically come back to Ind AS 113. So the objective of Ind AS 113 is threefold. Firstly, it goes on to define what fair value is. Secondly, it provides a framework for doing the fair value measurement. And thirdly, wherever a fair value measurement is done, it also provides the disclosure requirements. So these are the three main objectives of Ind AS 113. Now, let's spend some time on understanding what is the definition of fair value as provided in Ind AS 113. So just to basically read out the basic standard, fair value is the price that would be received to sell an asset or pay to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at the measurement date. So there are certain key aspects here. One is basically fair value is the price expected from the sale of an asset, or expected to be paid for transferring a liability. So it is basically the exit price which we are talking about. Now, how are we doing this sale, or how are we supposed to do this sale or transfer the liability? It is through a orderly transaction. So what we are talking about is an orderly transaction, and not a stressed sale, or not a distress sale, or not a liquidation sale. So it is an orderly transaction which we are talking about. When I say that it's not a liquidation sale, then again, where liquidation is done in an orderly manner, then such an orderly transaction can also be fair value, provided it is done in an orderly manner and it is not done under any distress circumstances. Now, this fair valuation is done. Fair valuation is done from the perspective of the market participants. So fair value is not done from an entity's perspective, but from the market participants' perspective. Basically, there are certain important aspects of fair value, important takeaways from fair value, which are: fair value is the exit price. It is not the result of a forced transaction or a distress sale. It is basically based out of an orderly transaction, and it is from a market's perspective and not from entity perspective. And finally, fair value has to be and the transaction orderly. When we talk about orderly transaction, we also have to talk about the market. So basically, an orderly transaction which happens in the principal market of the asset or liability, and where the principal market is not available, then it is the most advantageous market. So basically, what Ind AS 113 also prescribes is that if there are no circumstances to the contrary, no indicators to the contrary, then whatever market the entity is operating, that is the market in which has to be considered as the principal market. Having said that, if the principal market is not determinable, or if the principal market is not available, then we move from the principal market to the most advantageous market. Now, why are we basically talking about this principal market or most advantageous market? Now, let's take an example. Let's take an example to understand this concept a bit in detail. Let's presume that Let's presume that an entity is selling a particular asset, is selling its goods in the Indian market as well as in the overseas market. Now, when it is selling it in both in these two markets, then which market should we consider? The prices of which market should we consider is the question. Now, in that case, we have to consider that price which is available in the principal market, or the market in which the entity primarily operates. To determine which market the entity primarily operates, we need to take into consideration the volume of transaction, and also the basically the volume of transaction and the value of transaction. Now, to draw a parallel, probably from a transfer pricing angle, we have a similar concept in transfer pricing angle, whereby we take into consideration the comparable uncontrolled price method. So we can draw a parallel here between transfer pricing and Ind AS 113. So when the principal market is not available, only then we move to the most advantageous market to find out the price, to find out the observable inputs. What we mean by observable inputs, we will basically discuss it a bit later. So in order to identify the inputs, we have to choose the market. In order to choose the market, we need to look into the characteristics of the asset, and also where the entity is planning to sell the assets. So there might be restrictions in a particular market which prevents the sale of an asset in that entity, or settlement of the liability in that entity, or settlement of a liability by that entity, in which case we do not take such price into consideration. Again, there is a brief concept about transaction prices. Should transaction prices be considered in fair valuation? The answer is no. Transaction prices should not be considered in the fair value computation. The reason being, transaction prices are transaction specific and are not asset or liability specific. That is the reason we should not take into consideration the transaction costs. Any doubts still now? I mean, anything which we need to recapitulate here?
Can you once again please explain about transaction price? Because according to me, transaction price becomes a market price if that transaction is concluded.
Okay. My bad here. It's not the transaction price which we are talking about, but it's the transaction cost which we are talking about. As you rightly pointed out, transaction price is, in most of the cases, fair value is the transaction price. So we are not talking about transaction price here, but transaction cost. So just to rephrase what I meant to say, transaction costs will not form part of fair value. Transaction costs will be ignored for the purpose of computing the fair value. The reason being, transaction cost is transaction specific and not asset specific. Did it clarify the doubt which I myself created? I'm sorry for that.
Yes.
Awesome. Sorry. Now, there are
can you elaborate a little more when you say that transaction cost is not transaction specific but is asset specific?
Transaction cost is transaction specific but not asset specific. That's the reason it is not part of the fair value. Now, to elaborate that point, it all depends upon what is the principal characteristic of an asset. So let's take the example of let's say a particular commodity. So now there are two, the commodity exists in a particular location. Now it has to be sold in the primary market, or in the principal market, or in the most in the absence of principal market, in the most advantageous market. Now the costs incurred required to transport this commodity from its existence to the principal market will be part of the transaction cost, will be part of the fair market value. Having said that, if there are any costs which are required to be incurred for settling the transaction, for example, once the commodity reaches the principal market and sales and the commission is not the characteristic of the asset, or if it is specific to the transaction, then commission will not be part of the fair market value. But if
fair value.
Fair value, that's right.
Yeah.
Having said that, if commission is required, if commission is an essential ingredient of the asset, then even this transaction value becomes part of the cost. To give another example, let's say there exists an immobile property. Now the stamp duty and the registration fee which is required to obtain legal ownership, although it might be perceived to be a transaction cost, will be part of the fair value. So it all depends upon the characteristic of the asset, characteristic which determines whether transaction cost will form part of the fair value or not.
Okay.
So we need to consider the essential characteristic of the asset to determine whether transactions cost form part of the fair value. To summarize, if a cost is specific to a transaction but not the essential characteristics of an asset, then it will not form part of the fair value. But if the cost is essential characteristic of an asset, then it forms part of the fair value. So now, this was the definition. We have tried to basically in a concise manner cover everything which Ind AS 113 talks when it speaks about the definition of fair value. Once we have understood a bit about the definition of fair value, let's move to the next part of the objective, which is basically the framework which has been provided by Ind AS 113 to compute the fair value. Now, we all are aware of the valuation approaches. Like what we have in our valuation, under the valuation standards provided by ICAI, International Valuation Standards. Similarly, Ind AS 113 also provides three approaches. As we all know, the market approach, the cost approach, and the income approach. So basically, there is enough detailing of what these approaches are. When should these approaches be used has also been provided in Ind AS 113 in the form of appendix. Appendix B talks about this valuation approaches. Now, when do we choose, or what is the important criteria which we should keep in mind to choose a particular valuation technique? The underlying assumption is we should choose that valuation technique which is most appropriate under the circumstances and for which sufficient data is available. So let's take an example. Precisely what we have been doing till now. So Ind AS 113 just codifies this and just provides us the framework or the guidance factor which will help us to choose which technique should be used, which approach should be used, and even under the method, under the approach, which method has to be chosen. So now we are all when we do the valuations, we are all flummoxed by the question as to which valuation technique, which valuation approach should I choose, and under that approach, which valuation method should I choose? So this is one question which we all come across with. So to answer this question, I'll have to ask myself, when I choose a method, does it bring out is it the most appropriate method under the existing circumstances? and is sufficient data available for me to compute using the method which I have chosen. So these are the two guiding factors which will help me choose the valuation approach, and under the valuation approach, the valuation method. So Ind AS 113 incidentally uses the term valuation technique. So valuation technique is another word which is used for valuation approach. Both of them mean the same. To give an example, let's presume that there is an asset which is available, and we have enough. The asset is readily saleable in the market, but we do not have sufficient data, sufficient external data to corroborate whether this asset can be sold in the market, or the comparable prices. In which case, if comparable prices are not available, then the market approach cannot be used. Then we will have to look into other approaches, which might be a cost approach, or which might be an income approach. Incidentally, Ind AS 113 also talks about cost approach, and when talking about the cost approach, it basically speaks a lot about the replacement cost method. Under the cost method, it talks about the replacement cost method. So basically what Ind AS 113 prescribes is, in case we are using the cost approach, then let us take into consideration the price which the market participant would have to pay to replace an asset, or the price which you would get to retire a liability. So replacement cost method is spoken in a bit of detail in Ind AS 113. In fact, I mean, this is one place where I could find more literature about Ind AS 113 than under the ICA valuation standards. Now, if from a valuer's perspective, be it under Ind AS or under any other method, normally what we do is we list out the various approaches, and then I would say that it would be a good practice to say why we are choosing a particular valuation method, or conversely put, it is also a best practice to say why we are not choosing a particular approach or not choosing a particular method. So in such cases, the literature which is available in Ind AS 113 can be used as a guiding factor to eliminate some of the approaches which might not be appropriate under the circumstances, or for which sufficient data might not be available. So, I mean, unfortunately, I did not have enough time to basically collate what to put a tabular form to choose a particular method, but I think enough data is material in the public domain to basically help valuers document why they are choosing a particular method or why they are not choosing a particular method. So this is as far as the guidance factor to choose a particular valuation method. Any questions till now as far as the choice of valuation method is concerned? Okay. Now,
just one question. I'm just wondering.
Yes, sir.
Just clarify if that now, because this is a part of Ind AS 113 that you're showing us, correct, and it uses the word should. The entity should choose such a valuation technique which is appropriate in the circumstances in which certain data are available.
Correct, sir.
Are they trying to say that first, because they're using the word should, which indicates mandatory, and then they're also using singular, which is a valuation technique which is appropriate in the circumstances and for which sufficient data are available? Is the accounting standard tending to say that you should use either income approach or market approach or cost approach? Is it kind of giving an indication that only one of these should be applied, particularly because it is using the word should?
A very good question, sir. Probably the answer to this question is available in the second point, which we'll be discussing in a few seconds from now. So now, if you go,
the reason being that generally when we approach valuation assignments, it is normal for us to take at least two methods, either income approach and cost approach, and market approach, and see, and maybe at times even do a weighted average of all of them or something like that at the end of it. Whereas here, the first sentence seems to indicate that you need to go directionally in a slightly different way. So I just wanted to clarify if that is the real intent or there is any subsequent material which corrects for this kind of an authoritative sounding statement that is made out here.
Okay, very good question, sir. Very good question, Subbu sir. So the thing is, what it actually means is, whatever method which we are talking about, whatever method we are choosing about, the guiding factor should be these two things. It should be appropriate under the circumstances and sufficient data should be available. So the singular there used is to basically point out the fact that any method which we choose, we will have to take into consideration these two methods. So these two guiding factors. Having said that, Ind AS 113 does not restrict a particular valuation method. It does not restrict the valuer to use a particular valuation approach. In fact, it also, it also basically says that.
No, actually, it is not whether it asks you to use a particular method or not. The question is more about, does it require you to use only one method?
Definitely not.
While not saying that you must use either income approach or cost approach or market approach, is the intent here somewhat to say that if either take income or market or cost, but don't try to average, don't take two and find the average. Is that what is sought to be avoided under Ind AS 113? That was the question.
No, sir. No, sir. The thing is, it in fact, it actually prods, or it basically nudges the valuer to use multiple methods.
Okay.
It actually, the Ind AS 113 actually nudges. So normally, as you rightly said, not under Ind AS but under all other valuation methods, we basically use two methods. One to give the valuation, the other to provide a comfort or to basically provide a reconciliation, so that we can check the consistency of one method to the other. In fact, Ind AS, what approach we have been, what approach we have been following towards valuation is the same approach which Ind AS 113 also gently prods us to do. It does not restrict us to use a single method. It basically gives us the liberty to use as many methods as possible, provided whatever methods we use are appropriate under circumstances and sufficient data is available. Having said that, there might be multiple methods which might be appropriate under the circumstances. So just to basically now again drawing reference from transfer pricing. Under OECD, even if you talk about OECD, it talks about the most appropriate method. So there can be how do I choose the most appropriate method? By eliminating all those methods which are not appropriate under the circumstances or for which data is not available. By eliminating all the non appropriate methods, I'll be left with appropriate method, which can be a single appropriate method, or it can be multiple appropriate methods. So once I have multiple appropriate methods, then what do I do? The answer to this is said that is given by Ind AS 113 as well. Ind AS 113 says if multiple methods are used, valuation techniques are used, then we will be left with a range of values. Now, as we all understand, valuation cannot be a precise number. It has to be a range. That is how normally valuation, as we use it or as we understand it from a transaction perspective, gives us a range. Valuation, so when we say that, okay, the value of a particular asset can be between this and this price, that gives the room for the parties to negotiate. But that's the, if you ask me, that's the original requirement or the original purpose which the valuation serves. But having said that, now as we are moving from using valuation from negotiating a transaction to using valuation for statutory purposes or for accounting purposes, then we cannot do with a range. We will have to have a precise number. From a range of valuations, how do we arrive at a precise number? Because for the purpose of accounting, if you have a range, it will not serve the purpose. We cannot say that value of property, plant and equipment is between 1 crore rupees to 1.2 crore rupees. We'll have to give a particular number, and that particular number has to be recorded in the books of accounts. So we'll have to have a precise number. From that range, we will have to basically arrive at a particular number. And how do we arrive at that particular number? India clearly says that we should arrive at that number which is most representative of the fair value.
It's some tricky session, I want to get this. Okay.
So let's go. I mean, in this case,
Varki, wapas phone madidmele, I will just speak to you.
so in this case, I go back to my 5th standard class and I basically refer back to the measures of central tendency, mean, median, and mode. So again, so basically, when we talk about measures of central tendency, what did we actually talk about back then? We said that we will have to choose that measure of central tendency, that measure which will basically be able to correctly represent the entire population or most of the population. So in which case, which method of central tendency do we use to arrive at a precise number is left to us. Now, how do we choose it? So what should be the guiding principle for us to choose the measure of central tendency? The guiding principle is that it should be most representative of the fair value. Now, certain principles which we can use to arrive at, from a range to arrive at a precise number. How can we use how should we move from a range of numbers to a particular number? So now, if there is wide disparity in the numbers, or if there are certain outliers, let's say the valuation under one method gives a value which is too high or too diverse from a host of the other methods, then as the then mean will not serve the purpose. Then probably we might have to use a median, probably we might have to use a mode. Mode is highly unlikely, but probably median. Again, under median, which particular quartile should I choose depends upon the population, depends upon the range of values which I have computed. So depending upon the range of values which I have computed, I will have to choose the method to bring from the, to reduce the range to a particular number. So this is what, unfortunately, India AS 113 does not provide the guidance or does not provide a guidebook as to this. If this is the situation, then you'll have to use this method to move from range to a particular number. It does not give that because it cannot be codified. This cannot be codified. This is basically where a valuer brings in his experience, brings in his understanding about the value. Yeah. So basically, this is something. I mean, this is something interesting or something. This is something which I can always fall back to whenever a client or any other person, not just for the Ind AS valuation assignment. So now let's talk about a valuer's perspective. Now, how does Ind AS 113 help a valuer, not just in Ind AS assignment, but in other assignments? Now I can draw comfort. So when I have from a range of values, when I'm forced or required to arrive at a particular value, then what is the guidance which I should, or how do I arrive at a particular value, or where do I justify myself, or where is the authoritative prescription for me to arrive at a particular value? Probably I can refer back to Ind AS 113. It might be even for a transaction. It might be even for a. It might be for a transaction which does not require Ind AS valuation. I can draw comfort from the literature which is available in Ind AS 113. I leave the floor open for me to because I did not find either under international valuation standards or under ICA valuation standards something similar to this, a guidance which says that from how do you arrive at a particular value from a range of values. Probably I might have missed out. I mean, if for the benefit of everyone here, if anyone can help us understand, can throw some light about anywhere else where such this prescription, this guidance has been provided. Okay, moving forward. Now, sorry.
Yeah, Uttam, I was just going through the Ind AS para B2 in the appendix. It does not specify any particular method of valuation to arrive at the fair value. It just says you have to be consistent in your approach. So suppose at initial recognition you follow a particular method. On subsequent periods, if some adjustments need to be made, then based on appropriateness, you should follow the consistency as a principle. This is what I have understood by reading the Ind AS Appendix B paragraph.
Perfect, Ram sir. What you said is almost similar to what we have been discussing till now. So as you rightly said, there is no particular the Ind AS 113 does not prescribe that only a single method has to be used. Now you also brought to the Ram sir, you also brought to the fore one more important point regarding the consistency in using of a valuation technique. So now there are certain requirements, there are certain accounting standards which require fair valuation to be done on an year-to-year basis. We will discuss that in a bit later. Now, when fair valuation has to be done on an yearly basis, then as Ram sir rightly pointed out, as drawing from reference from B2, para B2 of Ind AS 113, we'll have to follow the technique consistently. There has to be consistency in the technique which we have chosen. Having said that, does it mean that whatever technique which I have chosen in the first year, that is the same technique which I have to use every year? Not necessarily. I can change the valuation technique if, when can I change the valuation technique? First year, let's presume that first year I use the income approach. For the third, fourth or fifth year, let's presume that I'm using the income approach. Why should I change it? I have to in order to, whenever I am changing the valuation technique, I should justify that such a change, I should be convinced that such a change is justified because the circumstances have changed, or data for the first technique, for the technique which was hitherto used is not available. That's the reason. So there has to be definite reason, justifiable reason for changing the technique. Now, further elaborating this point, whenever, I mean, this is from an accounting angle, not from a values perspective. Just to add a small point here, whenever a valuation technique is changed, then it will be perceived to be a change in accounting estimate. And as we all know, whenever there is a change in an accounting estimate, then it has to be given a prospective effect and not a retrospective effect. So this is just a small accounting point. This is just a small accounting point, which I wanted to basically make it clear when we are talking about whether multiple techniques are allowed, whether if valuation has to be done on a recurring basis, then should the same method be followed every year. If a method is changed, then what should be the guidance for that method, and what should be the implication of a change in the method. So basically we covered almost these points here. Unfortunately, this is not captured in the presentation because we are mostly talking from a values perspective. That's the reason I skipped all those points. Now
there is a participant inquiry. Would you like to take this? Madhumita Karar has raised her hand.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So my question was, when multiple method are being used for evaluation, like suppose you said that there will be a range and we have to use median or something to arrive at a particular number. But in this purpose, we also have to mention the method used in the financial statement. So when we are using multiple method and then we are arriving the value using a mean or median, whatever. So what method then we should write in the financial statement as far as disclosure purpose?
Very good question, Madhu madam. Now the thing is, when we have used multiple methods. Now okay, let's rewind a bit. We are saying that we have arrived at a particular number which we have calculated from a range which have been calculated using certain methods, using multiple methods. Now, so how did we arrive at this number? From the range, from the methods, in which case the disclosure should be of all the methods which we have used to arrive at it. Not only that, there should also be a disclosure as to how did we arrive at the particular number from the range of numbers.
Okay. Okay. Sir.
Awesome. Now, there is one more important
So,
point.
sir, just for a moment, I'd like to interrupt. So, the best thing will be like we will state that whole thing that we have used all the three methods. Suppose we have used all the three methods, that we have used the calculated the valuation using all the three methods, and the value is the mean of all the three methods used.
Yes, perfect.
I think that will be a proper disclosure to be done.
Perfect. Just a small addition here. There, we do not have just three methods. There are a host of methods. Approaches are three. Methods are multiple. Under each approach, there are multiple methods. I think we all understand that. So now, there is one more important concept which Ind AS 113 brings here. I mean, as a valuer, this is new to me as well. I mean, in fact, pardon my naiveness, I had not thought about this till now, but this Ind AS has prompted me to think about it. Now, what it says is, at the time of initial recognition, so when we do an initial recognition, we might use the transaction value, or we might have also used the fair value. Let's presume that initial recognition has been done using transaction value. Subsequently, at the time of disclosure or at the time of reporting, we might have used the fair value. Now, what Ind AS 113 also says is, when subsequently for subsequent recognition we have used other than transaction value, then we have to test the fair value which we have used against the transaction value of the initial recognition, and if there is a considerable difference, then we will have to recalibrate our assumptions on the basis of which we have calculated the fair market value. So what it actually means, I mean, what does this mean? From my understanding, I have taken a set of, let's say on 1st January 2020, I have done the initial recognition using the transaction value. And on 31st December 2020, I am required to do the valuation under fair market value. So I will do the valuation under fair market value using the set of assumptions, using the set of data. Once I have done that, I will also have to do the valuation for my internal workings. I will also have to do the valuation for my internal workings. I will also have to do the valuation of the same asset on the initial recognition date and see whether my fair valuation on the initial recognition date is different from the transaction value. If there is a difference, then it means that my assumptions or the data has to be recalibrated, and I'll have to recalibrate my data and or assumptions to ensure that my transaction value is same as that of the fair market value on the initial recognition date. Using these recalibrated assumptions, I will have to compute my fair market value on my disclosure date. So this is the kind of reconciliation which we do amongst different methods. Now we'll have to use it with the transaction value, and we'll have to be cautious. This we'll have to do it only in cases where initial recognition was fair value or was transaction value, subsequent recognition is fair value. And this has to be done for the first year. Once we have done it for the first year, then we need not repeat it every year. So this is one important takeaway as a valuer probably this, which I might think of using it for my other valuation assignments other than Ind AS 113.
So Uttam, can I ask you a question here? If we look at the transaction price, let me say, for instance, that we are doing an acquisition of a company. Okay. So we have acquired a company and the transaction price is a certain amount, let us say 10 crores is the transaction price. Now, fair value measurement is saying that this is an exit price. Okay. So if we go on the basis of exit price, it's very likely that this 10 crores, if we try to sell it in the market, we may get a price of, let us say, 9.5 crores. Because the entry price is 10 crores, the exit price is, let's say, 9.5 crores.
Mm-hmm.
So based on what you're saying here, it looks like it has to be calibrated in such a way that the initial recognition of 10 crores is equal to the fair value, which means that's an entry level price. What do you say?
Now, if the fair value is not same as that of the transaction value, at the time of initial recognition, if the fair value is not same as that of the transaction value, then the initial recognition itself is at the fair value.
Mm-hmm.
It will not be a transaction value. In most of the circumstances, it is presumed that the transaction value is the fair value. But there are instances where transactions value, where other Ind AS require us to use other than transaction value. In the case of business combinations, we cannot use the transaction. It has to be a fair value measure. So in which case, there we are not taking into consideration the transaction value, but the fair market value. When we, at the time of initial recognition itself, we have taken the fair market value, then recalibration at the time of subsequent measurement, subsequent disclosure will not arise.
Okay.
I am not sure whether we have been able to bring it to a logical conclusion, Abram sir.
We'll discuss it further because see, the issue which I constantly face is as follows. That is, when a buyer buys an asset, he goes and buys it at an entry level price. Okay, so some price is purchased. He's purchasing it at a certain price. Let's say 10 crores in this case, in the same example. Now, subsequently, there are a few standards which apply. One is, let us say, the impairment standard, which says that has the asset been impaired? In case the asset is impaired, then if you valued it at 8 crores, let us say, then you have to recognize a 2 crore impairment. Okay, so that's the impairment standard. However, just going by the fair valuation standard, only by the fair valuation standard, if we go on the basis of our own valuation estimates, okay, we are not using anymore the company's estimates of 10 crore price. Okay, we go on the basis of our own estimates as valuers. We take the company's estimates, we revalidate them, and we come up with something which says that, okay, this is worth only 9 crores. So what it means is that the initial recognition of the asset has taken place at 10 crores. But when we are valuing it at the end of the year for Ind AS purposes, let's say, we are valuing it, and we are saying that it is worth only 9 crores. If you want to do a purchase price allocation also, maybe we'll say this is worth only 9 crores. So then the difference goes off into goodwill.
Okay.
So, and every year when we do this measurement, suppose we do a measurement every year, there could be a difference. Okay, so I'm just trying to figure out what does this standard say in relation to if you have followed a certain entry level pricing on the first initial measurement. In subsequent measurements, will it be an exit price measurement, which we are using year to year?
Okay.
That's basically the question.
Okay. So now at the end of the year, for whatever purposes, we are doing the valuation and we have arrived at a particular value. Let's say in our example, we have arrived at a value of 9 crores. Now, this 9 crore valuation we have arrived at this 9 crore valuation using a set of assumptions, right? Correct. Now, these assumptions I will apply to my date on which I acquired the asset. The assumptions I will change. I will superimpose these assumptions on that date to the circumstances which existed on that date. Now, when I superimpose the assumptions, circumstances remain the same as that on the date of acquisition, but the assumptions are superimposed there. Accordingly, I will recompute the initial recognition using the set of assumptions for the circumstances which existed on the date of initial recognition. When I do that, if the price is other than 10 crores, which was my initial recognition, then which means my set of assumptions is wrong or are not appropriate. I wouldn't call it as wrong or not appropriate. In which case, I will have to change my assumptions to such a level that my assumptions applied to the circumstances which existed on the initial recognition date gives me 10 crores.
Right.
Provided,
so we equal the transaction price.
Yes, sir.
Fine.
Provided the
Yeah.
transaction price is the fair value. Provided transaction price is not disturbed.
Yeah, that's fine. Got it.
Any other questions here?
Yeah. To answer Mr. Abraham, I think para B4 of Ind AS 113 says it has to be subsequent valuation have to be based on transaction prices. Even whether it is market driven or if it is a related party transaction, whichever way it is, the company is entitled to values on a subsequent year's basis based on transaction price. This is what I have understood from para B4, page 29 of Ind AS 113.
Shall we move forward, Ram sir? Super.
Perfect. Okay, carry on.
Okay. Now, when we said that we'll have to choose a valuation technique which is most appropriate to the circumstances and for which sufficient data is available. Sufficient data is available. Just hold on with me for a minute on this sufficient data. So now from the sufficient data is basically the inputs which we use for making the valuation. Now Ind AS 113 bifurcates the inputs into two parts. One is observable inputs, the other one is unobservable inputs. So now what are observable inputs? Inputs which are available as per the available in the public domain, and which are same as that of the which are for the same asset or for the same liability or very close to the very much similar to the same asset or this liability are observable inputs. Examples of observable inputs are securities traded. I mean, the examples are there. The prices which we can derive from the stock exchange. The futures contract for the future price for the current for a particular commodity. Identical or similar assets in a different market. These are the examples of observable inputs. So now, what should be the? Let's also try to understand what are unobservable inputs. Inputs for which the market data is not readily available, or are unobservable inputs. So how do we arrive at these unobservable? So basically, whenever observable inputs are not available, we'll have to move from observable inputs to unobservable inputs. So basically, it's not a, basically someone has to show me, it's basically someone has to push me from a observable to use an unobservable output. It should not be my first choice. Unobservable input should not be my first choice. My first choice should be observable inputs. But if observable inputs are not available or are not appropriate for the circumstances, only then should I use unobservable inputs. For example, internal forecasts of cash flows from intangible assets, profit margin expectations, all these are unobservable inputs. Now, we all know that in the case of income approach, where we use the future cash flows, we use a lot of estimates. These estimates are based out of the internal forecast. These estimates are bought out of the profit margin expectations. So basically, now from a valuer's perspective, Ind AS 113 says, do not use it straightforward. Do not use these inputs as it is. Use these inputs only if the other inputs are not available or the other circumstances are not conducive. So would I be wrong in presuming that income approach should be the last resort? I mean, that is the conclusion which I would want to draw, saying that when this basically what India also says is, for determining the fair value technique, we should maximize the use of observable inputs and minimize the use of unobservable inputs. In which case, I put before the forum my understanding, which I have not tested much, as to does this mean that Ind AS 113 gives higher precedence to methods other than income approach and gives income approach the last preference? Would that conclusion be right on my part? Probably. Okay.
So Uttam, it's just like there was a discussion going on about the seminar which all of you attended yesterday, that the market is the best indicator of what is the value of a company. So the market approach finally does reflect an income approach, doesn't it?
It does, sir. I mean, in the case of income approach, the most important cog in the wheel is the beta, and beta is the discount factor, and discount factor is based on market participants and not on internal accrual. So, as you rightly said, income approach is also based on the market approach. Having said that, probably what we need to be aware of is, when we are saying that we have to reduce our dependency on unobservable inputs, and since internal forecast of cash flow is an unobservable inputs, it becomes our responsibility, according to me, it becomes our responsibility, if we are choosing the internal forecast, to ensure that there are no other inputs available. That's the reason I'm relying on the internal forecast. If there are other inputs which are available, then I should not use the internal forecast. Internal forecast, although I'm using the income approach, even under the income approach, for doing the forecast, if I'm using the internal forecast, then I will have to use the internal forecast as a last method of last resort. Before that, I'll have to it becomes, as a valuer, it would become my responsibility to test the internal forecast with other inputs to ensure that these internal cash flow forecasts are in line with the market expectations. Probably that is the responsibility which I'll have to cast upon myself. So, which means there are a lot of valuation reports which we say that in most of the valuation reports, we put a standard disclaimer saying that the forecasts are the responsibility of the management. We have relied on the forecast provided by the management, which brings us to an important question: Are we justified in putting such a disclaimer and trying to shrug off the responsibility of relying on the internal forecasts?
Just to answer a question that you raised a short while ago, that does this mean that as per Ind AS 113, cash flow forecast method or income method should not be used? That depends. The paragraph that you put in a slide here, examples of unobservable inputs are internal forecast of cash flows from intangible. This paragraph, have you copied as it is from Ind AS 113 or?
That is right. That is right.
If so, then I would not agree with your thing that Ind AS 113 does tend to discourage you, because if you read it carefully, what it only says that unobservable input is internal forecast of cash flows from intangible assets.
Agreed, sir.
Okay, so it does not mean that internal forecast of cash flows of an entire company may be classified as unobservable inputs.
Agreed, sir.
Okay, only if the cash flow forecast relates to forecast from intangible assets, would the cash flow forecast be classified as an unobservable input? Actually, as you were speaking, I was trying to scan through Ind AS 113, but I could not in that limited time span. But assuming for a moment that let's say you picked up this paragraph as it is from Ind AS 113, then I would not come to the conclusion that income approach does not constitute an observable approach. Okay.
Okay.
So, for example, let us say you are talking about a company which has got a historical track record of 10 years in existence. Correct?
Correct.
Right? What would make you think that a cash flow forecast provided by the management would constitute an unobservable input for a 10-year-old company vis-a-vis a cash flow forecast provided for a startup? So one has to make that distinction. Okay. So one would not put a blanket statement and say that, okay, cash flow forecasts constitute unobservable inputs. I would not agree with that. Okay. So therefore, with that logic, I would not come to the conclusion that Ind AS 113 discourages you from relying on cash flow forecasts or applying the income approach. Depends on the context.
Perfect.
If let's say this were to be a case of, let's say, pre-revenue startup, okay, then perhaps I would say that yes, in the case of pre-revenue startup, maybe an income approach constitutes an unobservable input. But if for a 10-year-old company, what reason would anybody have to come to the conclusion that income approach is an unobservable input? I mean, these are welcome, but I would apply that line of thinking. Any other views would be welcome. Yeah.
Uttam, my limited understanding of fair value as specified under Ind AS 113 is this. See, this is not valuing a business as a whole based on the future prospects or cash flow things. This is valuing the assets and liabilities as they stand on the date of valuation. Therefore, only market-based approach is more or less encouraged by the Ind AS 113. This is my reading of paragraph 15 of the paragraph 15 and 16 of the Ind AS 113.
Perfect, sir. Okay. So now to basically add few points to Subbu sir's observations, that income approach as such is not given a step-by-step treatment by. It would be wrong to say that Ind AS 113 dissuades people to use income approach. Point well taken. That's precisely rightly said, sir. So when we are using the income approach, if we are using the internal forecast, but which are not being corroborated by other evidences, for example, in the case of a company with sufficient history, if the future forecasts are in tandem with the past record, then we have observable inputs. But if the future forecasts are not as per the past history, then it might become, from an observable input, it might become an unobservable input. When we are using these observable inputs, so basically the point is, as Ram sir also rightly pointed out, we are only talking about an asset or a liability as exists on a particular date, as rightly said. So basically what we ought to do is, when we are using the income approach, or for that matter any approach, according to me, the valuer cannot basically just say that these inputs have been taken from the management and we owe no such responsibility to such inputs. We also have to say, probably what I'm proposing is, whenever we are relying on management estimate, we also say that we have made attempts to corroborate this, but we were not able to find, corroborate this. If we are not able to corroborate this, would such a disclosure be more appropriate, not just for Ind AS 113 purpose, but for general valuations? Would that be more appropriate? The reason why I'm spending a bit more time on this is whenever these valuations are presented for various purposes, people are questioning the valuer's report based on this particular assumption which is made, based on this one sentence which is put in the valuation report saying that the valuer relies on the management. So just because valuer has every right to rely on management's forecast. Now, having said that, if we add a few steps to our valuation process and make an appropriate disclosure about those steps which we have taken, which is basically going forward to corroborate the management estimates, trying to corroborate, and if it is possible, disclose how we have tried to corroborate. If it is not possible, let's disclose that we have not been able to corroborate, but let's put it on the valuation report. This, if in my humble opinion, the moment we put it, then it would help us stick by our valuation reports, at the same time not take undue responsibilities on our head. That's how I would like to conclude from this particular requirement of Ind AS 113. Okay. Now, again, this is more so for the purpose of disclosure, rather from the purpose from the perspective of framework. From a disclosure perspective, Ind AS 113 categorizes the valuation methods used on the basis of the inputs used into level 1, level 2, and level 3. So level 1 inputs, so basically the highest priority is level 1. So basically a valuer should use such a technique. A valuer should use such a technique which maximizes the use of level 1 inputs and minimizes the use of level 3 inputs, because level 1 inputs are observable inputs, level 3 inputs are unobservable inputs. Somewhere in between these two is sandwiched the level 2 inputs, which basically are based on level 1 inputs but are subjected to certain adjustments which we have made. So when we take observable data and we make certain changes, certain discounting or adding a control premium or probably a risk or probably reducing it. So when we do such changes, a level 1 input becomes a level 2 inputs, and when it is a level 2 input, we have to use, whenever an adjustment is made to a level 1 input, it becomes a level 2 input. So this is the hierarchy which has been prescribed by Ind AS 113. Why has this been prescribed? Because when we have used level 3 inputs, then for the purpose of disclosure, we need to disclose the level 3 inputs which we have used. So this is more so from a disclosure perspective rather than from a valuation perspective. Now, how do we bring this? If at all, I will have to use it for my general valuations from a valuer's perspective. I will take this as a point and I will try to change my reports in a manner in which, if I have used a unobservable data, then I will disclose. I will make a proper disclosure. I will take cue from what is prescribed under Ind AS 113, and I'll accordingly disclose it in my general report as well, that these are the unobservable inputs which I've used for arriving at the value. That will help, in my humble opinion, that will give a lot of credibility to our valuation reports. At the same time, it might be disputed, but we'll have to stand by those, the assumptions which we have made and the inputs which we have relied upon.
So, Uttam, can I ask a question now on level 3? See, normally when you look at a valuation which is done in a company's financial statements, the auditors would ask for an external opinion in relation to the value of an entity or value of an asset. Now, level 1 and level 2, it's probably quite unlikely that they will ask for an external opinion, because the level 1 is straightforward. It is just the market price of the asset. Level 2, it's also probably not requiring an external opinion. Level 3, however, in any company which is doing a level 3 valuation, which is there in its financial statements, it's possible that the auditor will say that, okay, these level 3 valuations which are done, why don't you get an external valuer to value it and get back to us with the opinion which can be corroborated. Management's estimates can be corroborated by a level 3 valuation by an external valuer. Okay. So in which case, as valuers, our job is to actually go in. This is our job actually. The level 3 valuation is what we are doing typically. And this is where I think our role comes in. So if we go and find a company which is doing a level 3 valuation, maybe that's potentially one which requires a valuation assignment. What do you think?
Perfect, sir. I mean, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. Just to add there, even I mean, for an auditor to get a comfort, he might insist upon a external valuation for a level 3 valuation. Having said that, even if an external valuer gives a valuation report on a level 3 valuation, that does not absolve the company from reporting the level 3 assumptions made, the impact on profit because of the level 3 valuation. It does not absolve it. An external valuation will not make a level 3 valuation a level 1 valuation. I mean, I'm sure Abraham sir also meant the same thing, but from a scope perspective, from the scope of the work which we can look into, yes, this is a very good place to look for as valuer. It's a very good place to look for. I completely agree with you there. Again, I do not want to, I mean, at the time of closure, I do not want to step into the controversial topic of whether level 1 and level 2 valuations also require an external valuer. In my opinion, it might be market based. It might be based on observable inputs, but still, because of a strict interpretation of the act, even level 1, level 2 valuations, in my humble opinion, require a registered values report. I mean, yes, this is a controversial topic. Probably we might look into that later. Probably we can have a session for that. Just to basically, I have, there are a host of things which have been prescribed by Ind AS 113 as far as the disclosures are concerned. One important point relating to disclosure prescribed by Ind AS 113 is that Ind AS 113 provides the minimum disclosures, and the disclosures prescribed by Ind AS 113 is supplemental to the other Ind ASs which require disclosure and or measurement. So if a particular Ind AS requires, let's say Ind AS 116 PPE requires a particular disclosure which is not included in Ind AS 113, which means the company has to report, has to disclose not just the disclosures prescribed by Ind AS 16, but also the disclosures prescribed by 113. This 113 disclosure requirements of 113 complements the other Ind AS. They are not. They do not. They do not act as. They do not. They are not in lieu, but in addition to the disclosures. So just to basically, disclosures are of two types. One would be recurring disclosures. Wherever an evaluation has to be done on a recurring basis, then the certain disclosures have to be made. There would be certain valuations which would be done on a non-recurring basis. So there are certain. So in the case of non-recurring disclosures, there are certain relaxations with respect to disclosures vis-a-vis a recurring disclosure. So it's sufficient to say that, I mean, since this is not a disclosure forum, let me not put a lot of weight on what disclosures are required. I again, let me conclude here by thanking each one of you for a patient hearing. Before we conclude, I leave the floor open for questions, discussions.
Uttam, so one question which actually my main purpose of attending this particular session was also that only. For example, if I, as a registered valuer, am undertaking an assignment which the purpose of that assignment is, let's say, for Ind AS 113 purposes, the company wants the valuation done, right? Okay. What different should I need to do, or what extra steps do I need to take, which I would not have to take had it been a general valuation and not under, not for Ind AS 113? What are the different things that I should do?
I don't think Ind AS 113, I mean, see, basically, okay, that depends upon what are we doing for the, I mean, unfortunately, to answer this question, we need to basically see as to what we are doing under Ind AS, under the regular valuation assignments. For example, since we have already discussed this, see, basically, Ind AS 113 does not cast upon the valuer any special requirement which are not otherwise provided under the other valuation standards, be it IVS, be it ICA valuation standard. It also provides that. But there are certain areas which the IVS or the ICA valuation standard are silent. For example, how do I what do I do when I rely on unobservable data? So in which case, let's make an so in Ind AS, if it were an Ind AS assignment, then I would say that I would have to, in my valuation report, I will have to bring out the fact that I have taken all possible attempts to use observable data. Despite using all possible attempts, I have not been able to find out reliable observable data. That's the reason I am relying on the unobservable data. So such a disclosure would be required under Ind AS in the valuation report, which need not be which might not be required under other valuation assignments. If you ask me, such a disclosure, as it would be good practice to have it in our other valuation assignments also, but this is one thing probably which might not be required in other valuation assignments.
Okay.
I mean, that's one which I can point out. The reason why I'm not able to bring out clear-cut distinction is Ind AS 113. I mean, they are according to me, they are in line. I mean, they tell it tells mostly what the other valuations from as a valuer. It tells the same thing as the valuer also needs to do. So that's the reason there is no clear-cut distinction which I can draw, is what I can say. I mean, that's again probably my inexperience which speaks here. Any experience view would be is always welcome here.
Yeah, maybe other people who would have done valuation for Ind AS purposes can chip in and answer if they've done anything differently in those valuation assignments as compared to other assignments. Yeah.
So Subha, I think that rather than Ind AS, let's approach it with a different lens. I think that what we are first and foremost looking to the valuation standards for is what is the standard of value which we use, let's say. So suppose we say fair value is the standard of value which we are using. Now this fair value has to be defined somewhere. So to look at the definition of fair value, we have to look into Ind AS 113. And when we get to Ind AS 113, it gives us the basis on which we get to fair value, which is exit price and whatever Uttam has put on screen. Okay, so that is one thing which we need to get fixed in our minds conceptually. That is, fair value is what? So, like for instance, at Sheetal's question initially, what is the difference between fair value, fair market value? Which will you use in your assignment? Will it be fair value, fair market value? You have to be clear about that. Now, then when you go further along from fair value and you try to see, now there are those three steps which are there in fair value, which is a level 1, level 2 and level 3 input. Obviously, fair value is most likely defined by the level 1 input. And you will go down to the level 3 input observable inputs only in case the other two are not available. The hierarchy, in the fair value hierarchy. I think this is the principle which we need to follow in doing our valuation assignments, Subha. That's my view.
Okay.
See, Uttam, this is my limited understanding. Like, what are the various valuation requirements that are contemplated under the Companies Act, which require valuation by a registered valuer? Whether India's 113 fair valuation is something which needs to be done by a registered valuer, or that those assets liabilities have to be simply fair valued under India's 113. So it means the auditor himself can make a fair valuation, or the company itself can arrive at the inputs based on level 1 inputs it has, or level 2 or level 3, whatever it is, and whether it is appropriate or not, is the auditor competent and permitted to do, whether it fits the requirements under 113, and therefore make a disclosure in the financial statements. And if he does so, whether there will be a conflict of interest between his responsibilities as a stat auditor and also a fair valuer. These are the points I'm not able to understand, because
yes, sir. Probably I'll draw comfort from Abram sir's inputs, saying that in the case of level 1, so if you are talking from an auditor's perspective, sorry.
see, Uttam, why I started talking is why I started talking was that whether if only level 3 inputs are available, based on the client's inputs, is the auditor permitted to represent or evaluate and then make a disclosure in the financial statements, or is he expected to ask the client to engage a registered valuer and get the asset liabilities valued under Ind AS 113? That was the question that was being posed earlier. Whether I mean, in my limited experience, the market, how the auditors are approaching is that in the case of level 3 input, in the case of valuation derived from a level 3 inputs, for them to draw comfort, they basically get this, insist that the management gets the valuation done by a registered valuer and or by a third party valuer, be it registered or anyone else. Now, when they use this, when the valuation has been done by a third party valuer, in the auditor's report, the auditors basically follow the scriptures which has been mentioned by the standards on auditing relating to using the work of an expert. So by making the disclosure, they will try to draw comfort there. I mean, that's how auditors would want to get comfort there. Now, as far as whether only level 3 valuations is to be done by a registered valuer or no valuation has to be done by a registered valuer is something which we have not yet been able to arrive consensus at. Having said that, if you observe section 247 never says that only fair valuation has to be done by a registered valuer. It says any valuation under the act requires a registered valuer. So it leaves the scope even wide open, is what I feel. This is a controversial topic. I mean, so I think it has to be a forum discussion rather than a with luminaries in this association who can act as a moderator. But I think it's high time we discuss this at some point of time, probably as a forum discussion rather than as a presentation by any one particular party. I think two questions have arisen now. Whether it is statutorily required, because what you mentioned was market practice, to ask the clients to get it valued by an external valuer. Whether it is statutorily, whether it is legally required that Ind AS 113 has to be done by a registered valuer, that is one question that needs to be discussed. Point number 2, just by relying on the expert's opinion, can the auditor simply cut and paste that valuation amount and then complete his disclosure requirements? That is point number 2. I think he has to apply his thoughts, and if he is convinced that whatever value that is given by the external person does not fit the bill, he cannot be accepted, then he has to do an independent assessment of the fair value and then probably expect the company to make a disclosure. These are the 2 points we may consider discussing in a larger forum.
Just to add to a small anecdote to this. So basically, we had done the valuation of an Indian entity, which was a subsidiary of a foreign client. So the auditors of the foreign company, they basically reached out to us to provide our credentials for them to draw comfort that the work on which they are relying are indeed reliable, kind of stuff. So I mean, that is what exactly SCA 620 of the Indian ICA also prescribes. I mean, I think we are deviating from the valuation topic. Ram sir, point well taken. Abram sir, Srinivasan sir, and all experts. Basically, we can have a forum discussion moderated by one or some of the experts, and then we can take it forward from there. So, as far as today's topic is concerned, I've tried to basically do justice to whatever opportunity which I have given. I hope I have done something valuable here. So if there are no other questions, then probably can we disperse?
Can I request? Shita, please go ahead.
See, there is a financial statement as on 31st March 2020. And in the financial statement, there is this Ind AS 113 table drawn. So if we have to draw a valuation report, not for Ind AS, but under Companies Act. So whether we can use this fair values directly without any calculations?
I mean, when such a valuation has been set to pass the test of the management and also the test of the auditors, and finally the test of the shareholders in the UGM, then I don't see a reason why I cannot rely upon the valuations which have been presented in the Indies.
So here comes two questions. This is as on 31st March 2020. So one, if the valuation report is dated 31st March 2020, and second, if the valuation report is dated somewhere in August or September.
Now, let's basically go back just a second. To answer your question, probably we might have to look at this point. Sorry. The definition of valuation. Just a second. Sorry. Yeah. The important point here is the measurement date. Now, the valuation report might be dated 30th September, 25th July, or whatever it is. But if you observe that valuation report, the valuation report will be dated 31st, whatever date, but the valuation date will be 31st March 2020.
Correct.
It ought to be 31st March 2020.
Okay. Okay. So this measurement can be, I mean, they could have done this somewhere in April or June, but they have to give the date of 31st March 2020.
Valuation report can be dated any date, but the valuation date has to be 31st March 2020.
Okay. But only for that specific assets, right?
Yes, of course. Not every asset requires a fair valuation.
But in this case, they have made some investments into subsidiary also. So whether we can, without valuing a subsidiary, can we go ahead with the fair value given by them for that investment?
So correct my understanding. We are doing a valuation assignment not for India's but for something else.
Right. Yes.
Am I right? So
yes.
Now the question is, when we are doing a valuation for something else, can I rely on the valuation of the subsidiary which is given on 31st March 2020? To answer this question, what would be my valuation date? Would it also be 31st March 2020?
No, assuming no.
If that is the case, then there has been changes from 31st March 2020. Has there been any considerable changes? If there are no considerable, depending upon the materiality and which method I am using, that is also a very important thing. Which method I am using, I'll have to basically take a decision call there. I might, if it is not material, or if it's a method which does not require me to do an individual asset valuation. If, let's say, for my current valuation assignment, I am using, let's presume for a moment, I'm using income approach, which will look into the future cash flows. Then I need not take into consideration the valuation of the subsidiary as on 31st March.
Yeah, see, Uttam and
Shitalji.
Shitalji, see, if you are going to use the fair value of investments in the books of the holding company to value the subsidiary company, and independently do the valuation for a subsidiary company, which is going to be totally different, I don't think you can use the holding company's methodology. You have to standalone value the subsidiary company and incorporate the same in the books of the holding company so far in order to arrive at the share value or disclosure requirements under whatever law. That is how it has to be done, because impairment testing has to be done. So if the subsidiary books show very pathetic financials and therefore the value per share is nothing, we can't go by a higher fair value arrived at for some other purpose in the hands of the holding company.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I think it's a good time for us to call it a day and discuss. Shilpaji?
Yes. One announcement. Mr. Joy Kumar Jain session as scheduled will be tomorrow. And we also have the second part of business combination sessions, which the other day we could not complete. That is planned to be scheduled on Sunday between 10 to 12. I will be posting the same in the group as well. And now I would like to request Mr. Subbarayadu to convey vote of thanks.
Okay. So I think I thoroughly enjoyed this session by Uttam, and particularly those of us who attended Damodaran's and MS Sahu's session yesterday, where he made this statement that fair value and accounting are kind of oxymorons. I was more keen to first again refresh and refurbish whatever I knew in Ind AS 113, and I was keen to know that what different should I do if I am doing a valuation under Ind AS, not necessarily 113, as against a generic valuation required for doing any transaction. And I think the conversations that followed were really very, very enlightening. And thanks, Uttam, for bringing to aspect once again and discussing in detail the fair value hierarchy, that is level 1, level 2, and level 3, and what are the disclosure requirements in particular that would be required in case we are undertaking an engagement for Ind AS purposes. Thank you very much.